So my goal here is to strengthen the Jewish world. I'm not trying to debate you or anything like that. There's many interviews I do to get people's story. And I know that you and I have similar stories, both being Spanish, both being from Miami. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So myself, I kind of was a military brat, to be honest. My father's American, my mother's from Panama.
I thought you were Cuban for some reason.
No, my stepmother's from Panama. My stepmother's from Cuba, my mother's from Panama. No, my father likes Latino women, so he's a smart man.
All right.
So basically, no, just regular American brought up. My mother and my father broke up, and they got divorced when I was like a baby. So I was raised by my mother and my stepfather. Grew up in a pretty much Catholic and evangelical background. And when my mother bought me a Bible when I was a kid for my birthday, started reading things. And well, okay, this is different than Sunday school. So from there, it's kind of where the Jewish journey started.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Maryland, Delaware. So when we left Panama, I was like 2 years old. And stepdad, he got stationed in North Carolina, Camp Lejeune. And then we lived there for a little bit, and then we moved up to Philadelphia suburb, Tinicum Township. And then we moved to Cecil County, Maryland. It's like cornfields and pickup trucks. And then Delaware. I graduated high school.
You grew up Catholic, Protestant?
My father was trying to raise us Catholic. But the mother, she decided she didn't want to be Catholic anymore. She became evangelical. Kind of allowed me to see things differently, go through different types of Christianity. So that allowed me to see, okay, there's two different opinions in his aspect at a very young age. But really, the thing that was consistent between both of them was how they educated the young kids. And this is the New Testament. The best thing since sliced bread, all this good stuff. Start reading the Torah. You ask them a question. How can it be if it completely contradicts the Torah? Somebody can't die for somebody else. Mm-hmm. It's like 7 years old. How does this kid know this?
So you're saying that when you were a kid, you were questioning.
Yeah.
Your parents are still Christian today?
Mother's very strong in her evangelicalism. I have to tell her, you can't do this every time I call. She means well, but it is what it is. She needs to accept that. I've been Jewish.
She tries to convert you back.
Oh, of course. She thinks, well, you're going to go to hell. I'm like, well, anyway, you're going to go to hell. She cares about my father. Actually, we didn't talk for many years, but I first started into conversion. I think one of the things that disappointed him the most was Yosef Mizrahi video of him and the professor. Back then, I used to be very gun-ho Yosef Mizrahi.
You mean with the Christian professor?
Yeah, the Christian professor, exactly.
In my opinion, that really wasn't a good discussion. It was poorly planned. They just needed someone to scapegoat, someone to look ridiculous.
After growing and learning and yeah, I understand it. It's not what we want to do. We don't need to put ourselves in the internet making a mockery of fellow Americans. Right now, we have the respect of the majority of Christians simply because we respect them, but we don't do what they do. That's the status quo we have. That's the status quo we should maintain. And to go out there and find a guy to make him look like a clown in front of people, in front of the entire Jewish world, now understanding Allah as well as I have been able to understand, we know that this is a big chuvah of Shem. Find a guy that seems like to be the weakest person you can debate. When you look at the character of the guy, Lamashi's completely like very B-type personality. He means well. You're putting him in front of a whole bunch of Jews who are already Haredi. He's only there for one reason. He's debate. He is debate, and it was unfortunate that now looking back at it now, it is what it is. So you can't say it changed time.
Even the audience was really clueless. I think they even called him a priest. This is one example I used to come against this whole Boca Raton synagogue thing that these guys were making bigger than it really was, because they were saying, oh, like, how could you bring a Christian into a synagogue? I'm like, hey, that's exactly what Rabbi Mizrahi did. Now, mind you, he chose the least educated individual. I mean, if he would have brought Michael Brown or someone who could have took it to Mizrahi, it sounds like they were mimicking what Gentiles did to Jews in the Middle Ages. The vast majority of debates in the Middle Ages, it wasn't always Pablo Christianity versus the Ramban. I'm sure they picked the least educated Jew you could find to make a public spectacle out of him, and that's what they did with this guy. Really, I don't think Mizrahi knows Christianity that well. That's why he was reading from a pamphlet, kind of throwing questions out. That's probably the counter-missionary debate on YouTube that gets the most views. And it really makes Jews look bad. I don't even think it makes Christians look that bad, because it seems like the guy was being super respectful. He actually accredited Mizrahi with certain points and said, oh, that's a good point, this and that. Mizrahi was just being rude in his own manner. I'm not against Mizrahi completely, and I made a video defending the guy. Not that they would do the same for me. Everything he teaches, there's a source for. Maybe a source that I don't accept as authoritative, but there's a source for everything he teaches. So if someone's going to come up against him, they really should come up against other Achronim that he's quoting. Most people don't know that everything that makes people feel uncomfortable is quoting Shulchan Aruch. They've dumbed down Judaism to such a level that when someone just reads straight source material, it makes you uncomfortable. Because they're used to Jonathan Sacks and Shmuley Boteach, guys who make Judaism sound sweet and nice. And I acknowledge there's a time for that. But at the same time, we shouldn't get appalled when we hear something that we don't agree with. And especially when the charge is being led by people like Dana Cohen, who's actually a guy. Anyone who leads any charge against anything, who doesn't have the courage to put their real picture or real name up, is not worth following.
We'll go back a little bit. I used to be one of the biggest followers of Yosef Mizrahi. You are right. He does have his sources. His sources are valid. My issue is that he doesn't quote the entire source. So when you teach a specific halacha, you got to put the entire perspective. And I'll take it to the extent. You also, a lot of times, you have to read the different opinions around the Stam halacha and the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, it does say, for instance, somebody who's a Mechal Shabbat is not somebody you can count for minyan. However, keep reading. There's situations if we need a minyan, we have to count somebody who's not Shomer Shabbat. Yeah, is it the most ideal thing? No, but this is America. You don't have minions every half hour in communities like Phoenix or Denver or whatever it might be. I don't necessarily disagree with how he teaches. I think the thing that made me think about why I do not want to follow the whole Mizrahi pack is once they started the attempt with Harav Goldberg in Boca Raton, they're using something of spreading Avodah Zarah, as if the person speaking in front of the Aron Kodesh, in front of that Beit Knesset. If you actually look at the Boca Raton synagogue, it's an entire Jewish community. So it's a mamish huge place. They have conference halls, and that's what they were doing the lectures. We have a guy who, he has this Christian missionary work, but if you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, strictly dictates that somebody is a Jew or a Muslim, you're not supposed to proselyte them. There's no point to it, because as long as they believe in God, they're already following the mission that God has for them. This is according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. As Jews or as Muslims or as Sabaeans, we can argue that we all have a share in the world according to Islam and according to Roman Catholicism. To say that we have people who have no clue about Christianity making allegations to Av Beit Din of the RCC in southern United States, it was somebody who doesn't even have a smicha. He just has signed off that he knows the knowledge from Harav Eliyahu Ben Chaim. It's unacceptable. You have a guy who studied in his yeshivot his entire life. He has Yuri and Yadin, and you have nothing. And it's a title, you don't need it. I mean, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein never really had a smicha, but this is a guy that is
really. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein never had smicha. I mean, I think I heard that about of a time, but not Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. But anyways, you're saying that Rabbi Yossi Mizrahi doesn't have smicha?
So the understanding is that he had basically Rab Ben Chaim sign off that he knows the information. Never actually took a smicha exam. There's an interview with him and Brenner, Mr. Brenner. He discusses the topic. He's like, I don't have a traditional smicha. I have Rab Ben Chaim and some other rabbis sign up. And I understand.
Yeah, but that is smicha. Yeah. Most people don't know that the smicha that people validate nowadays is reform smicha or reform style smicha. In other words, the Reform was the first group that started giving institutional smicha, Hebrew Union College. So now that we have smicha from YU, that we have smicha from Ner Yisrael, like smicha in everything, but in the old days, and even in yeshivot in Israel, you get smicha in a specific area, Shabbos, Nida, or what's called Rav Umanig, which is probably what he's talking about, which is nowadays called smicha rabbanis, which is a rabbi just writing your letter, saying, this guy knows his stuff, and that's, mind you, the smicha you get in Israel. You get smicha in Isser V'Heter, because you study for 2 years basic laws of kashrus, of malicha, of salting, terugos, mixtures. He has traditional Sephardi smicha then, because most Sephardi rabbis have that type of smicha. Most people in Israel don't have smicha because they don't need smicha. Smicha is something that you get when they're going to come to America and they want to make a living. Because for some reason here, no one respects you, like unless you have the title rabbi. In Israel, you have guys learning in Kollel from the morning all the way to night Seder, and they never get to smicha because you don't need it.
I see what you're saying, and I don't...
By Goldberg, it has smicha from YU. So YU rabbis are the highest paid rabbis in America, in the Orthodox world. And I'm a big fan of YU, by the way. My favorite rabbi, who I would call, if anything, my Rav Muvchak, in terms of where I would like to get in my level of learning, is Rav Hershel Schechter. And I'm also a big fan of Rav Aron Pinkhas. I mean, I love YU, and I'm a big advocate for modern Orthodoxy, by the way. But anyways, my video regarding the Boca Raton scandal was against what Rabbi Mizrahi was doing, like, not for it.
Right.
But they did something that was sort of dishonest, and a lot of people do this. I mean, they go to the Gedolim in Israel who don't even speak English, who don't know anything about what's happening in America, and they present them the story. Of course, these guys are going to write a letter and saying, oh, it's a shand, it's a Chol Hashem.
Well, here's the biggest issue that I had with it. Listen, if he wanted to take him to a Beit Din and do this legally, you know what? I want to basically give permission to tell you to stop, or if you don't stop, then we have permission to basically have a campaign against you. So if they would have done that, I would not have any beef. The beef that I have is that they took it upon themselves to assume what they were doing without understanding the contractual agreement between him and Kelly, and they took it upon themselves to slander his name.
Yeah.
They made an entire campaign slandering this guy who's a big Tamil Chacham. On top of that, they embarrass the entire community. They make the entire community look bad. They make the entire modern Orthodox world look bad. Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned, I'm very pro modern Orthodox to Haredi. As long as you understand what you follow and that other people follow other things that may not be to your standard, that if you can respect that, then you respect, and you're doing your job as a Jew. If you're going around, you try to damage somebody's reputation. And I'm going to get to what my humble opinion of the motivation is. Okay, so we have Rabbi Goldberg, who was completely slandered for something that wasn't even happening the way they did. They use in the second Avodah Zarah and Avodah HaKukravim in Mishnah Torah, and in the Shulchan Aruch, they're saying, okay, well, somebody who brings somebody to teach Avodah Zarah, this person must be liable for the death penalty. But the person obviously and clearly and contractually was not making a speech about Christianity. He was making a speech about, it was a business motivational speech. So if you want to take it a step further, they're saying that he's Chayiv Mitzah. If the Sanhedrin existed today, and Mizrahi and Reuben went to the Sanhedrin and said they're doing something that's committed out of Avodah Zarah, and according to my quote, they'd actually be liable for the death penalty.
Right. They made a few mistakes. First, they labeled them minim. Now, minut doesn't apply to Gentiles at all. It applies to born Jews. In other words, a non-Jew by definition is an idolater. No, I didn't really exist post Sefer Yoshua. Why would the Almighty put us in Galut and expect everyone around us that we do business with, that we communicate with every day, to be monotheist? If that was the case, then every Gentile would be, Chayev Mita in our presence. So the notion of being a min, of being a sectarian, doesn't apply to Gentiles. That's one. And two, like you said, he was there to teach something else, right? And we have this principle. They tell you there's wisdom amongst the Goyim, believe them, but if they tell you there's Torah amongst the Goyim, don't believe them. So, in other words, we could learn from non-Jewish individuals. My daughter goes here to an Orthodox school, and virtually every Orthodox yeshiva has Gentiles, Christians, teaching non-religious subjects. Math, English, science, it's typically always Gentiles. Are they really planning to make some sort of religious test before they hire any Gentile, or do they actually believe that a Gentile atheist is in some way better than a Gentile Christian, or that in some way we have more in common with an atheist than we do with a Christian? Anyway you look at it, it wasn't thought out, right? But the thing is, their audience are not people who value learning. It's not that they will never value learning, but they're usually either people who trying to be brought to Torah, so they're not even there yet. They're trying to make their peace with God. But also, there's a segment of the Jewish world that doesn't really want to learn. They constantly always have to be under the fear of God in order to keep them on the right path. Not just the Rambam, there's many Chachamim that teach you that's the wrong way to relate to the Almighty. The best way to relate to God is out of love, not out of fear.
Of course.
So, which is why whenever their teacher points their finger at someone, these people come out, the woodworks, Facebook, posting this, talking bad about people, and I'll tell you, because they do it to me. Instead of coming from an academic perspective, like, hey, you know what? Judaism is so vast. There are different opinions. I mean, not one person's right. That's one thing. But this guy, like I said, he was a Catholic. A Catholic mission doesn't involve trying to convert people to Catholicism. It's more like building hospitals and then houses and
going to like Uganda or something where they have villages.
Yeah.
And that's
It wasn't thought out. Clearly wasn't thought out. There's really a dumbing down of Judaism that's happening specifically on YouTube, especially with the Ger movement or Rabbi Alona Nava, the Rabbi Dror. I'm sure these guys personally are sweet guys. Those are the only guys who get attention. It's really first-grade Judaism, but people don't want to graduate to something more.
You got to place the blame on these rabbis, because the rabbis need to explain, hey, this is just an introduction. You need to move on to more advanced lectures or start reading books. They really need to advise them. They're saying, learn Torah, learn Torah, learn Torah. But in my humble opinion, there's a financial benefit of keeping these guys as their students. As long as these guys keep listening, they keep getting donations. And this is the thing about the whole internet rabbi thing. You're able to capture more audience. And when you can capture more audience, you have the potential of earning more money for your cause, which I'm not against them earning money. But I am against earning money that's used to hurt other Jews that are 100% halakhically acceptable. Say what you want to say, modern Orthodox is just as religious as the Haredim and the Hasidim. And in many cases, probably more so. I don't identify as modern Orthodox. I don't identify myself as Haredi. I identify myself as probably Haredi-leaning centrist. Meaning, okay, I wear a black hat on Shabbat and Yom Tov. I do follow Yaakov Yosef most of the time, unless I disagree with it because it's based on the Shulchan Aruch. But generally speaking, yes, you're absolutely right. People are not learning important concepts. This is why I started doing a few videos here and there. For instance, electricity on Yom Tov. And it really opened my
controversial topic.
Yeah, exactly. People think that somebody who is using electricity on Yom Tov is should not be counted as a minion, and they're not. And this is not the case. You have many chachamim that permitted using electricity on Yom Tov. And to tell you the truth, how it started is, Yaakov Yosef does not discuss if you can actually use an electric stove on Yom Tov as it does with the gas stove. There's no discussion in Yaakov Yosef about it. And so now it opens up a big broad, okay, so what do you do? So I personally hold by the Ashkenazim with using electric stoves in Yom Tov, Rav Moshe Feinstein. But
when you say Yom Tov, do you include Shabbat there?
No, well, I don't know. Shabbat, no, I want to talk about Shabbat.
So, I mean, Shabbat is a Yom Tov. Just, just to be clear.
Right, semantics, yeah, but...
Right. I mean, I made a video on the topic. I won't comment on it just because, I mean, it's very controversial, but in my video, I gave a list of many rabbis. Most people don't know that prior to the 1900s, the vast majority of Orthodox Jews actually used electricity, and it wasn't till the Chazon Ish came on the scene that one rabbi changed everything. In Judaism, the more primitive you are, the more religious you look. Even this notion that something that's holy and religious has to look old and archaic. I used to live in the old city of Jerusalem. Disgusting cats everywhere and cat crap, and it's all falling apart. And I'm thinking, like, why don't you just tear this all down and make it modern? And it's like, oh, but then it would lose its kedusha. And it's just kind of like a sickness in your mind. Obviously, like when Shlomo Melech was building the temple, he was trying to do it the most modern, in the most modern way possible with sand hydraulics and all this stuff. And nowadays, we're going backwards instead of going forwards. People who try to get closer to God will start to dress like how we think the patriarchs used to dress. Because it's really a sick way of looking at religion. If Moshe Rabbeinu was walking around today, he wouldn't be wearing no turban and no tube. He's probably wearing an Armani suit. I guess like how Rabbi Ovadia Yosef used to ride. He was the first one in Eretz Yisrael to always get the new BMWs. Most people don't know that. He only rode in BMWs.
Yeah. No, actually, there's a story about it. Somebody got donated the money for the BMW in the 70s. And he said the seat wasn't comfortable. The guy took the car back and got it. He's like, oh.
But, I mean, you got to know who you are, and you got to roll in style. You can't. You'd be like a black Hebrew Israelite dressed like a Thundercat in Times Square. You got to move forward.
My opinion, Judaism has to we have halachot, but halachot is constant for the times, and as the times evolve, the halachot works for the times. And instead of trying to find a way to make everything forbidden, we need to start. And this, by the way, which is what causes the biggest sinat chinam, is that they don't do this, so they're not religious. You can't count them for minions. God forbid. You have to ask. You have to have the concept of understanding all their opinions. People need to learn more than one opinion. They can't just, like, for instance, people go into conversion. And, I did something a little bit different than most people. I learned from Chofetz Chaim. I learned from Chorin rabbis. I learned from Chabad. And, I went to Chabad Yeshiva. But I didn't just keep my mind in just one box. Because if you keep your mind in one box, you look at everyone else's lessons. But if you learn everything, different opinions, and understand, when the rabbis were asking me before I finished my conversion, okay, so tell me the halachot to this, I would tell them Chabad, Ashkenazi, and Sephardic. And honestly, I think somebody going through conversion, that's something that's important to understand, because once they get out there and now they're Jewish, and they see somebody do something that's foreign to them, are they going to react, I can't eat here, or are they going to say, okay, cool, that's interesting, I never seen it, explain that to me. So rather than having a closed mind, they have to be open-minded. One of my biggest pet peeves is people who call people out with haircuts or small things, or like what they're wearing for clothes. Like those skinny jeans, or some people that wear skinny jeans, I do sometimes. And that's a minhag goy. I'm like, so this is a minhag goy, but your suit is not a minhag goy. The black hat you wear is not a minhag goy. Let's rethink this. Yasser Arafat wears a suit, so should we wear a suit?
Right. Yeah, but you're saying that converts should know this. I mean, I think it benefits born Jews to know this more than converts. Right? I mean, because they're the ones who are in the position to actually change things. Converts are just coming in. That's definitely not going to change unless, I don't even know how you could change it. In this area, Judaism reformed is Judaism no longer. People don't know that in the old days, people used to pick and choose, and it's okay to pick and choose. But the only principle is that anyone who builds a halachic understanding outside of Chazal is practicing heresy. The notion of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, that means that you could pick anything you want if it comes from the Sanhedrin, because all opinions are coming directly from God in some authoritative manner. But nowadays, you're like, no, we don't paskin like that. Perhaps you don't paskin like that. You can't tell me what I don't paskin like if we're both paskining from the Gemara.
So one of the things I dislike the most is we don't use the Gemara for halakhic source. I said, what do you think everything that halachot comes from? Everything from halachot, even things that we may disagree with, even things from that basically the Zohar paskins on the minority rejected opinions of the Gemara. And all these things we take from, but we don't paskin like the Gemara. No, this is, if you wanted to go to a Beit Din and you wanted to win a judgment, yeah, you're going to go learn the Gemara. You're going to learn it very well, so you can find, this is what Chazal says, this is what the Mishnah says, and I believe that that would actually supersede what the Chofetz Chaim says in the Mishnah Berurah.
I think people who make that statement are people who don't know too much about Jewish law. We don't paskin about the Mishnah Torah. We don't paskin straight from the Mishnah or straight from the Gemara. They say that because the rabbis gave people the tools to figure out Judaism for themselves, they wouldn't be making the big bucks. There is a lot of truth to what you said, that they're trying to keep people down for financial gain.
You're not allowed to. You're supposed to rebuke, but there's a whole thing to rebuke. You have to know. You have to understand the halacha to rebuke. You have not only understand what the halacha says, but what is the punishment for not doing the halacha. If you don't know what the punishment for breaking the halacha is, you shouldn't be rebuking people. And then that's just the one aspect of it. Now you're going to embarrass people. It's one of my fights I have in my synagogue all the time. You have somebody comes in, they're not religious, they have no clue what's going on. And you have somebody who's like, you cannot do this. I'm like, the guy never comes back. It's like, how do you expect to grow a community like this?
That happens a lot in Sephardi synagogues. In Sephardi synagogues, everyone's like a Rosh Hashanah. This is why I only really go to the Ashkenazi shows. Now, mind you, the yeshivas I went to were Ashkenazi. I was in Aish, I was in Or Sameach. It's just because I noticed they're more open-minded. There's many people, mainly the people who comment and troll on my posts, who are not Jewish yet, who consider themselves Sephardi for silly reasons. For one, because they happen to be Hispanic. They think, oh, I'm going to be accepted among Sephardim. Wrong. I mean, most people don't know that if you're not Israeli, if you don't speak Hebrew, you will not be accepted in a Sephardi synagogue. Now, mind you, they'll let you come in and pray, but they're never really going to they won't trust you. There's another group that appreciates authentic halacha, and they think because the Rambam called themselves Sephardi, that in some way the Sephardim today are an extension to the Rambam, or even the Shulchan Aruch, and they don't know how disconnected Sephardic Jewry is today from, for sure, the Rambam, or even the Chachamim of Aleppo. It's like another religion. Remind you, Sephardic Judaism is a lot more mystically inclined than Ashkenazi Judaism also, which makes it a little less rational. And also the infighting. I've never seen anyone fight in an Ashkenazi synagogue, but I've seen them fight in Sephardi synagogues. I mean, fist fight.
I'm one of those guys in my Beit Knesset, and in Baruch Hashem, like, somebody calls a rabbi, I'll say the rabbi is wrong, because I got a fantastic rabbi. He does learn his Kabbalah, he learns Rashid Hochma. As far as the halachis, he's one of a kind. He's not one to say, well, if you do this, that's fine, because actually you have the permission to do so. He's not one that says, well, the Ben Ish Chai says this, and that's it. And you're right. The Sephardic world doesn't realize, they all think that authentic Sephardic Judaism is this ultra-Kabbalistic thing, which is not necessarily the case. Ben Ish Chai was highly influenced by the Hasidic movement, and a lot of his train of thought was influenced by what the Hasidim taught. And so when he meant the halachot, the Ben Ish Chai halachot, he made them revolving around the Kabbalistic traditions of the Hasidim.
This is what made Rabbi Yosef controversial, because he went against the Ben Ish Chai, and he said that we should go back to the Shulchan Aruch.
He was almost put in harem. To say that we must follow Kabbalistic customs is mandatory. I can pull 20 sources to say otherwise from Chazal. Clearly, Masechet Hagiga 13b tells us the guidelines of who is allowed to learn Kabbalah. This is the guidelines right from Chazal.
I mean, not Kabbalah.
It's a secret to the Torah, but
Merkava.
Merkava is basically the chariot with the four faces and everything.
Right. Because Kabbalah didn't appear till 1270 of the Common Era, and that word wasn't even used to refer to that till post the Zohar. But anyways,
right. No, I understand. I'll tell you the truth. I do learn Kabbalistic seifers. I'm not one who like publicly tells people you have to learn this and this and that. Something you're supposed to do it quietly with your Rav or whatever. You don't need to, and you're not supposed to let it affect your legal decisions. Then the whole aspect of it is to have you understand what's happening in the spiritual realm, but to understand that your actions and what you do in the mitzvah you perform ultimately controls everything that you get credited for and not get credited for, and what your responsibilities in the world. What happens in the spiritual realm is a result of your actions here. But basing what your actions should be here based on the spiritual realm, the worst thing to do. Because if you think something's just going to happen because it's there, so it has to happen. No, you have to do action. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu and Am Yisrael going to the Red Sea. They had to go into the Red Sea before it opened. You have to have action.
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I disagree a lot on the understanding Kabbalah.
I just make a distinction between Kabbalah and Judaism. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be nice, could even help you on a personal or even on a grand level. We shouldn't call it Torah. It really frustrates me when I hear someone say, the Torah says, and they quote the Tanya. I mean, we always have to make a distinction. I mean, Chazal always made a distinction, but you read the Gemara straight through, they'll say, this is the Rabbanan, this is the Raita. But suddenly, nowadays, the Torah teaches and they quote Rashi. It says in the Torah, it says, Lo tosef Allah, lo tegor mimenu, right? Don't add or take away from it.
That's my problem with the Kabbalah. It's not because I personally don't have a problem with its validity. I have a whole different mindset about the Zohar. It's not supposed to be meant to make anybody's decision. It's supposed to tell you what's happening when you make your decision. It's supposed to get a spiritual high to understand something, but it's not supposed to direct you into what to do. And if people can realize that,
it's just subjective literature. It's like anything. It's like a medrash. And you can say the same thing for midrashim. Right? I mean, there's some midrashim. Hey, there's a lot of wisdom in certain midrashim. I mean, some are silly, but I mean, it's there if you want it. But to call it the Zohar, Kadosh, I mean, now it's not just the Zohar, it's the Holy Zohar. It's like, Mamish, it comes from Hashem now. Why do you include other books? And let's throw the Quran in there where we're at it. There has to be a line in the sand. We just can't accept everything as holy just because some guy with a beard appears on the cover. That's my thing. I'm for developing a systematic theology in the Jewish world, being able to connect the dots. When we package Judaism and hand it over to someone, whether he's a Gentile or he's an unaffiliated Jew, it makes sense. And then he could embrace the religion because it makes sense and not because some guilt trip, right? I mean, that's how people do kiruv nowadays. They go up to unaffiliated Jews and tell them they owe it to the grandmother for every reason other than it makes sense. Or it'll make the world a better place if you keep mitzvot. I've never heard, mind you, I was in kiruv. That's what I did in Jerusalem. I was paid to go up to birthright kids and try to get them to go to yeshiva. And everyone around me is, oh, you're Jewish? Oh, either you're special, you owe it to your ancestors, every reason other than an ethical one. Now, mind you, the Christians have it wrong also, that they're trying to make you religious just because you don't want to go to hell. But why do we always have to have an agenda like this? The agenda should be peace, the ultimate goal. Like, you know what? If you keep Torah and you encourage everyone around you to keep Torah, you end up leaving the world a little better than you found it. I've never heard anyone say that. I mean, that's what I try to do. And this is why I encourage people to become Jewish. I never said it's an actual chovah for someone to go and encourage a Gentile to become Jewish. I just say, it's a good idea that we have to inhabit the same planet as these people. We might as well bring them over to our side. Duh. Oh, well, there's no obligation. Asher Meza says that everyone has to be Jewish. I'm like, if you want to worship the God of the Torah is only worshipped one way, by keeping his commandments. That's it. And the God of the Torah doesn't make a distinction in those commandments. So being that there's a commandment to circumcise yourself, then there's also a commandment to enter in the covenant if you're trying to please his God. Am I obligating you to become Jewish? No, I mean, you could do what you want. But anyways, I think in terms of obligation, there's no obligation to make a Gentile into a Jew, but I just think it's a good idea. And there's a lot of things we do in Judaism just because it's a good idea, not necessarily because you're obligated to. There's no commandment to love your wife, right? We love our wife. It's a smart thing to do. I mean, mind you, marriage is a contract to begin with, but there's no obligation for a man to offer his wife love. Clothing, sex, food, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, this is halachic. Love doesn't exist in terms of your obligation, but of course, you're expected to. Same thing with offering Torah to the world. We have a mitzvah to emulate the Almighty. And what did the Almighty do? He offered Torah to not just Israel, but to the Erev Rav. And I don't buy this whole notion that the Erev Rav were in some way evil and all this stuff. No, they were just a mixed multitude. Some of them Meforshim teach that they were more than the actual Jews who left Mitzrayim. So just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu offered Torah to the world, emulating him, we should do the same thing.
Sheva Mitzvah Ben Noach. It really applies in the land of Israel. If they want to live in the land of Israel, they have to keep the seven laws. Is it expected of them to keep it outside of the land of Israel? No. It's not. It's the whole thing. This is the commandments they have to keep. We should encourage them to keep it, but technically, it's really if they want to live in the land of Israel.
Right, or any land that we conquer. So what will be, I guess, an extension to the land of Israel. Yeah, no, this is what the Halacha says. I mean, mind you, the Shulchan didn't speak on this, but the Rambam does clearly.
I think it's a step further too. I think there's a lot of religions out there that are not Jewish that fulfill the commandments of the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach. I think Islam is one of them. I think today we have a very big misconception of, we have a lot of people who are very quick to judge Arabs and Muslims, and I think, well, did you actually read the Quran? You actually know what the Quran says. Well, it says this, no, that's a Hadith. That Hadith comes from the 11th century. Well, what about this? That's a Hadith from the 12th century. And what's the Hadith? Basically the Midrash for that.
Right. You know that I consider Islam avodah zarah, right?
I've never actually heard you say that, but
I have a whole video on it. There's a few places I disagree with the Rambam in, but it's not just that it's me disagreeing. I mean, I'm quoting other rabbis who disagree with him, like the Ritva. There's a confusion in the Jewish world nowadays that we think that only because you're a monotheist that you are automatically not an idolater, which is silly if you think about it. If you walk around thinking that Zeus is Chas v'Shalom God, does that make you an idolater?
Well, it depends. And it depends if
it makes you a monotheist. Yes, I mean, you believe in one power, but that doesn't mean you're not an idolater. Of course you're an idolater. If you walk around thinking that Jesus is God alone, then you're an idolater.
I've had this discussion with my Rav. We talked about my opinion. Is that to an extent, in that aspect, like, okay, for instance, Hinduism. Hinduism has lots of different gods. There's a supreme god above all the gods, which is basically how the things, how is basically described in Sefer Enoch. Sefer Enoch talks about how the Malachim were thrown down and they taught they taught mankind all the different angels and what they do. I tell you, by the time Enoch's generation comes, they were already worshiping the different angels for the different tasks that they wanted them to do. So that's is it Avodah Zarah in a sense? Yeah. If you're praying to another entity, yes. It to suggest that, and I'll say, like, let's say they say, well, these are other gods under Zeus, as an example. Zeus is the supreme god. So to say there's one supreme god over the other gods, and in the context of Kabbalistic Judaism, and I know you don't like that combination, but you have a god and you have all the Malachim. All the Malachim do all the tasks that God wants them to do, depending on the different attributes. And so it makes sense to see the same thing in, let's say, Greek theology or Indian theology. Is it Avodah Zarah? Some people would say no. Some people would say no because they actually have a supreme God.
I've never heard of that. I've never heard of this whole notion. What do you mean? Only because there's a supreme God apart from the other gods, that doesn't make it idolatry? Even the term Avodah Zarah, foreign worship, it means you're worshiping something other than the God in the Torah. So if someone is worshiping a turtle, and then someone says that turtle is the supreme God, that's not idolatry? I don't get it. I don't get it.
I'm saying that there's opinions. Now, I'll tell you an opinion I disagree with my Rav about Zoroastrianism, and they actually believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but there's different, and they also have the other side.
They don't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They believe in Zoroaster, but they're dualistic. So they believe in the sons of darkness and the sons of light. But it's not the God of the Bible. Some people say that it predates much of the Torah. You have to watch my video, because I bring many sources. It's just the Rambam. The Rambam was really a Das Yachid in that time, saying that Islam was not idolatry, because the vast majority of the rabbis said it was. And then, of course, the Rambams and Rambams, everyone started falling in line with him after he said it. Right? And mind you, he was actually the first one to ever say that Christianity is idolatry. This is where it gets a little controversial, because I believe that Islam is idolatry and that Messianic Judaism is not idolatry.
So what is your opinion? Why is Islam idolatry? They believe they worship the same God. He's the same characteristics. He's the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov.
It's not the same God. First of all, the way we determine what God we worship is on what that God demands from us. So they believe that the Torah we have is corrupted, that it was corrupted by the Jews, and that only
that is actually a hadith. That's not actually in the Quran. The Quran actually doesn't say anything about the Torah.
I didn't say the Quran said it. I said Muslims believe that. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of their theology comes from the hadith. Oh, that's fine. But this is what Islam teaches, and it's the core of Islam. But regardless, they teach that the Jews corrupted the Torah, and only the Quran has the true interpretation of God's will for man. So that's not the same God. It's a different God. They keep different day. They pray towards a different direction. It's a different religion. It's not the same God. Now, mind you, it is one God, and I think this is where all the confusion comes in. Now, there are things in Islam that fall under the category of halachic avodah zarah. There are standards of avodah zarah. Like it states in Masechet Sanhedrin, it talks about Markulis, of this is how you worship this God, by throwing stones at it. And this is virtually identical to what they do with Mecca. So for that reason, it's also idolatry. The Shiites have a practice of cutting themselves for Ali, which is cutting themselves for the dead. Another Doraita example of clear idolatry. Now, all these things are halachic. In other words, it falls under the realm of avodah zarah according to the Torah and according to the actual halakha. Now, Christianity, or at least Messianic Judaism, doesn't have any of this. If a Messianic Jew keeps Torah Shebektav, Torah Shebal Peh, he happens to believe that Yeshua is Mashiach. And mind you, even if he believes that there are divine aspects to Yeshua, just how Chabad teaches that the Rabbi is the atzmut in a goof, that's also not idolatry. I mean, it's foolish, but it doesn't fall under the rubric of halakhic idolatry because the Talmud really has nothing negative to say about Christianity. Now, there's some instances about someone named Yeshua. No one knows that that's really Jesus. Some say it's not. It exists 250 years before, whatever. In terms of Christianity, it's really gray area when it comes to halakha. I mean, Messianic Judaism is really just Judaism plus Jesus. Some Jewish kind of
depends on what level. I mean, you have like different levels of it.
Obviously. So I'm saying those who fall into the example I gave. Now, for sure, Catholicism is idolatry. Mainstream Christianity is idolatry. But Messianic Judaism, the way it's practiced by many nowadays as really an extension of Orthodox Judaism, I don't consider that idolatry. While Islam I do, because it's just a different religion.
I disagree. Because it has to be a specific God that was known to do that. Since Islam's not saying that there's a specific God that it's thrown earth to, or it's a custom. It has to be the custom. You have to pray to a specific God for the certain way that it aspires to. Islam clearly says that there's only one God. Because Islam says there's only one God, I hate this parking spot. Because Islam says there's only one God, and there's no other gods that the people worshiping. It could not be possible that them doing the task like throwing a rock at like the Kaaba or whatever it might be, or going to the Kaaba, identifying as a God, could be Avodah Zarah. So I mean, it says in I think it's the second Avodah Zarah, what you have to do for Avodah Zarah has to be a libation, basically a wine offering. Has to be a libation. It has to be a burnt offering. It has to be a sacrifice. Says like I'm poor, I have to literally use the bathroom on it. And that's it.
Every god had a different specific form of worship. If they're emulating something that was done to a particular god, it is idolatry. Not to mention that it's a different religion. Messianic Judaism is not a different religion. I mean, Islam is a completely different religion. Their God demands different things from them. They have a separate holy book. They don't consider the Torah holy. Come on, man. Mind you, it's the Rambam that made this famous, and it's the Rambam that made famous the notion that Christianity is idolatry, while the Meiri and others felt that it wasn't. Anyways, I mean, I'm not trying to convince you in this area.
No, yeah, of course.
I have a whole video on it, and I have tons of sources. Now, I respect people who hold a different perspective for the main reason that we don't have a Sanhedrin. So if I say that Islam is idolatry, it's only my opinion. It's not a definitive statement. Just like if I say that Messianic Judaism...
Based on your research. It's based on your research that you studied.
But we don't know, like, so there's another Sanhedrin. If ever the Sanhedrin is rebuilt again, which I believe is impossible, but if it's rebuilt and then they say, yeah, Messianic Judaism is idolatry and Islam is not, then it automatically comes mutter to, like the Rambam says, like pray in a mosque. Even the Rambam statement was just opinion. The Yud Gimel Karamuda are also opinion. So there's another Sanhedrin, it's all opinion. The Mizrahi crowd doesn't make a distinction between an actual din and opinion, which is why they're more passionately outspoken about what they believe or what they don't believe. But because I make that distinction, that makes me, by definition, more open-minded. And I think this is where we are forced to operate from. Because we're really, in Judaism, I would say, as it exists today, 80% of it is opinion. And
well, a lot of stuff we follow today, I agree with that. And again, this is the thing that the biggest thing is in Judaism today. We don't know how to accept what other people do as being right unless they do what we do. And we got to get out of the mindset. So one of the things I love about Rab Ben Chaim is how he teaches stuff. He talks about the yeshiva system today. And that they don't teach you to think, they just teach you to give you information. Well, what's the point of having information if you're not going to utilize the information to think for yourself? The idea is to have the information to make a decision for yourself. That's why you go to yeshiva. If you can't think other than what does my rabbi do, it's like, well, no, there's a lot of things I do differently than my rabbi. And he says, I'm completely, why not? You're right. You have a valid opinion. Somewhere
no, he doesn't believe in Kabbalah either. Just in case.
Ben Chaim? Oh, no, he's not a Kabbalist, of course.
No, it's not that he's not a Kabbalist. He doesn't believe in Kabbalah. I'm saying, like, if you're looking for rabbis to admire or to emulate, we just know that he doesn't adhere to that. I like him a lot, with the exception that I see him peddling this Noid movement, and it's kind of like, I notice that this typically comes from a lot of Zionist rabbis. just because I think Zionism in general makes you more insular, more ethnocentric, unfortunately. Right. Now, mind you, I mean, I think that converts in Israel have it very easy. In other words, not that it's easy to convert there, but they're welcomed more in Israel than in America. But Gentiles aren't. Kids that learned in American yeshivas, they go to Israel and they get radicalized by these religious Zionist rabbis, like almost wanting to like hurt Christians when they see them singing their songs, like in Ben Yehuda or like in the Old City.
It is a shame. Like, well, as Jews, we're not supposed to like look for something to fight for. I mean, we're all obligated to protect yourself. We're not obligated to go out and look for a fight. And
well, their excuse is that because they believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that Christianity is idolatry, then it's an actual mitzvah to kill an idolater in Eretz Yisrael. So that's their argument. But I mean, I guess like no one ever told them that was just the Rambam's opinion. And also with like notion that
they actually have to see them do the Avodah Zarah.